So. Good evening. Tonight we're going to be starting the second epistle of Peter. I've got more outline prepared than I think I have time to teach in one setting, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. We'll adapt some way or another. But before we get into the class tonight, I've got to ask some of you older brothers and sisters, are you guys getting a lot of phishing calls on your phones for people wanting to basically they're trying to get your Medicare numbers or something like that? Yeah. I had 3 calls yesterday from people who were telling me, well, we sent you this card in the mail, did you get it? And then what they're wanting to do is to, treat me very nice and polite and then take me down this path of give us your Medicare number or something like that. Today it was a little bit more aggressive on them doing that. So I'm feel an obligation, and because of my role in the congregation, to answer the phone when it comes through with a valid number. If you find yourself on my voicemail, leave a message, because I had like 8 or 9 of these calls today, and the one of the guys, I was calling him out on what he was doing, and he hung up on me. I've had a scammer hang up on me twice now. This is the second time, so. Just something weird going around. So if the people call you and say, do you have Medicare Parts A and B, don't give them anything. You didn't make the call, don't give them a number. All right, so let's try this for a refreshing change. Let's study a little bit. So we just finished 1 Peter. And Peter's first letter focuses on an external threat to the church, which is persecution. We don't have any historical evidence or anything like that suggests that the church ever persecuted itself, at least until you get into more of the Middle Ages and things like that, with some of the things that the Roman Catholic Church did amongst themselves. But in the first century, the church never persecuted itself, so it's an external threat. Peter's second letter focuses on an internal threat, which is false teaching. Administrative note, I put an introduction Word document, an introduction to 2 Peter Word document on Lightpost, along with the PowerPoints and things like that. That's something I had written a little bit earlier and looked at, and I thought, well, this might be pretty good information, a little bit more detail about the background of the letter and stuff like that. Feel free to pull it down and read it. Feel free not to, if you want to, either way. And also, I haven't said this in a while, but just a gentle reminder that our Bible classes are intended to guide and assist you in your own personal study and growth. We don't have the time and the ability to do everything in Bible class, that you might learn from your own study. But we do want to try to give you some guidance in some of the things that the writers are saying or what have you, but you still have some responsibility to do to do your own study. So put them together, you'll do fine. All right. The purpose of the letter. The purpose of Peter's letter, the second letter especially, is to counter a form of false teaching that is emerging in the church. This false teaching was a blending of Christianity and Greek philosophy, and it's known as Gnosticism, from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. And so Gnosticism doesn't become fully grown in its teaching until sometime in the 2nd century, but its roots are already present. So even though Gnosticism is the focus of this letter, this is not the only place it's been mentioned in the New Testament. The apostles Paul and John both addressed Gnosticism in their letters, and the letter of Jude also addresses this topic. In 1 Corinthians, Paul raises three topics that are directly or indirectly related to Gnosticism. When he talks about sexual license in 1 Corinthians 5 and 6, there were Gnostics, we'll get into how they get to this particular point, but there were Gnostics that practiced that or advocated that. An arrogance based on knowledge in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, that's classic Gnosticism there, that particular attitude. And finally, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul addresses those who would deny the resurrection of Christ, which is a core element of Gnosticism. Again, when Paul's writing this, it's more in its infancy, and it gets a lot further developed and a lot more wrong as time goes on. But it is that. 1 John is written to counter the teachings of Gnosticism and the behaviors generated by Gnosticism. So you can't say you love God while hating your brother. That's kind of a Gnostic thing there, because they see a clear separation between spirituality and how you interact in this world. And John doesn't let that slide. How we interact in the world and with the world is a product of, being a Christian. It's supposed to have an impact on that. So there's some other things that we'll get into a little bit later, but that's what it is. Now, this is an ever-present danger, I think, for us as Christians, is this idea of Christianity and fill in the blank. People have been doing this for years, basically for centuries, since the very beginning, and sometimes it comes to us in unusual ways, a way that would make no sense to us, but it does in the culture that this was done in. After World War II, when Christian missionaries went into India, they converted a lot of Hindus. And then they found out that a lot of the Hindus they converted were worshiping both the Hindu gods and the God of the Bible. Now, why is that? That doesn't make sense to us. Normally in our culture, if you convert from something to something else, this gets left behind, that doesn't. For the Indians, because the people of India, which is basically a pagan religion with a pantheon of gods and things like that, they looked at it as, you know what? Before you guys came, I had one perfectly good religion, and now I have two perfectly good religions. And so they had to do a lot of education and working and teaching the people to kind of get them out of that mentality. And, we don't think like that at all in this country or, in the faith. But here, when you start merging Christianity and Greek philosophy, or Christianity and transcendental meditation, or Christianity and these other things, you're going to adulterate the product. You're going to enter impurities into the product of Christianity. And that's the thing that's the false teaching that is being taught against here. Gnosticism comes in a variety of flavors. It's like ice cream. I like chocolate ice cream. I can get in several different kinds of chocolates. You might like strawberry or Neapolitan or something like that. You'll find something in the world of ice cream that you like. And so, but in all of its various inceptions, its key and core concept was knowledge. And this is the key to salvation. So Gnostics denied that Jesus was the Son of God. From a Greek philosophy, or from a Greek religious background, or their pantheon, things like that, the idea of a God sacrificing his or her son so that people could live forever makes no sense. Gods don't do anything like that, and therefore the God of the Bible didn't do anything like that, at least according to the Gnostics. They also denied his physical resurrection. People don't just jump out of the grave every day, and we understand that. That's one of the things that makes his resurrection dramatically significant to us. It's a game changer in this, and it's an important part. We are saved because he was resurrected. And then some Gnostics saw their own resurrection as a spiritual awakening and not a physical event. So their view of this was, we're not going to be raised from the dead and go to eternity in heaven with God, or we are going to that, but it's a transformation type of a thing, and it's based on knowledge, not on the blood of Christ. So, you've got a shaky foundation. And so I do also want to kind of emphasize here, we sometimes look at too many things as false doctrine. The fact that we might disagree on a point or two of Scripture doesn't necessarily mean either one of us is teaching false doctrine or true doctrine for that matter. It means we have a disagreement. I don't agree with some things that I thought were true 5 years ago. Go 10 years, I don't agree with some of those principles too. That's called growth. That's not worth fighting about. Now this attacks the very core of the gospel. The identity, the work, and the purpose of Jesus and what he did for us on the cross. So that's, this isn't some, it's more than just philosophical meanderings or thoughts. Gnosticism believed that the flesh was irrelevant. It's not important because we're going to transcend this as we acquire enough knowledge to get to this particular point. We will have this special kind of resurrection thing. But because the flesh was irrelevant, they tended toward two extremes on how to manage its desires. One of them was extreme self-denial of the flesh. And this might be characterized by, how many of you like to sleep at night? Yeah, I do. I mean, everybody does that. Well, if you're this type of a Gnostic, you do not want to sleep on a comfortable bed because you're not suffering, you're not denying the flesh. That food that you like, the favorite meal and stuff like that, don't eat that. Just eat the bare minimum, whatever you can do to survive and things like that. Gary?
Does this include those people that used to whip themselves?
Yes, that's another thing of it because that's how you beat it out of the flesh, that kind of a thing. And if you go back and look at a lot of the monastic orders that are going to emerge in the Catholic Church later on in, the Middle Ages and things like that, they kind of went down this self-denial of the flesh. They did a lot of those types of things. The other extreme was indulgence of the flesh. So the flesh is going to do what the flesh is going to do, and you might as well let it do it. But as long as my spirit is aligned with God, it'll all be okay. Now, personally, if I was having to choose between, one of those two outcomes, one of those two philosophies, I'm going the indulgence route. Yeah, I would be very surprised if we didn't have a majority of us that would go down that route, if that was the only thing the only two choices we had. But even Paul says that, he talks about this in some of his writings about they deny I think it's 1 Timothy, isn't it, where he talks about people who deny things like eating food and things like this, which were perfectly good gifts that God gave us, denying marriage and all of these kinds of things. Well, that's kind of coming from the birth of Gnosticism here at this particular time. So, people did it.
I was just thinking about Romans 6 kind of deals with that too.
Yeah.
Where Paul says, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? May it never be. But that's one of the things that they would do.
Yeah.
They would talk about the great grace of God, and therefore we can indulge in the flesh.
Yeah, and that's the indulgence part of it there. So, yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Anything else? Yeah. Well, the Galatians got caught up in the other false doctrine extreme of that particular day and time, which was we were going to have Christianity and Judaism. We're going to have Christianity and the law. So anytime we're going to do Christianity and, there's a problem. There's a problem. I don't care what the and is. There's a problem. Now, that doesn't mean that something that you have learned in the past was not useful to you. I would kind of maybe go with Christianity and mathematics because I majored in math in college and that kind of a thing, and I was really good at it until I forgot how to do it all, because I haven't used it in 40 years. But, I might want to do something like that and mathematically prove everything or whatever it is that goes along with that. So it's possible to do it. That don't make it right. And it doesn't add anything to it. Doesn't add anything to Christianity that we actually need, and it actually detracts from it. So just stop at Christianity. Don't put an and on it. Don't add this other thing into it. And That's a step in the right direction for us. So, the threat to the church. Well, in 1 Peter, Peter is talking about a coming persecution that Christians are going to experience. And that represents an external threat to the church. I mean, they're not persecuting themselves. This is the Roman Empire. And it's a scary thing when the Roman Empire does this because, number one, they did it to other people at various times in their history. And number two, they were pretty good at it. Whatever point they were trying to make with this, they were going to make this point. So that's bad. That's an external threat. False teaching represents an internal threat to Christians and the church. And so my question is, which do you think is the greater threat? Why? It's subversive. Well, generally speaking, those on the outside, when they're coming for you, you know that, okay, that's the bad guys there. If let's think about the invasion of Normandy on June the 6th, 1944. The Germans had a very clear picture who the bad guys was in their eyes, and that was the Allies. They knew they were going to land. Everybody knew this was coming. They didn't know precisely where it was until they started hitting the beach at Normandy on that day. But that was all in front of them. They knew that's the direction we got to go. It's the ones from the inside. That's the danger. Germany fought two foes on that day. They fought the Allied military forces landing on the beaches of Normandy, but they also had to fight the French resistance, who was blowing up telephone lines and rail lines and destroying bridges and things like that to try to prevent German reinforcements from getting there. That was their internal threat. Yeah.
It's a lot easier to defend against an external threat.
Yeah.
Because you can say, you're not allowed to come in.
Yeah.
And you be inherently just like not trustful from the outside.
Yeah.
From the inside, though, it's like, well, I can't treat every Christian with suspicion because that doesn't work. It wouldn't be a functional body if I treat everybody with suspicion. I'd also be labeling a whole lot of people as false teachers who aren't false teachers.
Yeah.
But false teachers do arise.
They
Be
do.
vigilant
Yeah.
and yet not constantly
And I think that's you're hitting on the point that I think is the scariest part to me about this, which is we know them, don't we? We know who, this is our brother or our sister in Christ that's doing this. We may not understand exactly how they got to this particular point that they're doing, that they're changing their beliefs or their core values or something like that. But we know them. Oftentimes they were close friends and things like that, people we cared about, people we ought to care about. And so that makes that threat all the more difficult to deal with. And so it's one of the reasons that we have to keep an eye out for it. Now, again, emphasizing not just because somebody says something that you don't agree with does not mean that they're trying to teach false doctrine. Growth is an element of Christianity that we're going to pursue, we're going to develop, we're going to grow as we go on. And so you will find for yourselves that your beliefs, values, and things like that are changing over time. That's a good thing. That means the Word is doing what the Word is supposed to do in you. All right. The writing of the letter. There's a little bit of there is what I'm going to call minor disagreement about the time and place of writing or whether Peter wrote the letter. I call it a minor disagreement. Scholars call this, a hill to die for. Some of them do. Some people think that this was written around 64 AD. I'm going to give you the most likely scenario here. I think the most likely scenario is that Peter wrote this letter from Rome around 66, 67 AD. This would place Peter's death near the end of Nero's persecution, which ran about 2.5, maybe 3 years from 64 to 67 AD. That was brutal. What Nero did to Christians was unspeakable, almost. Some of the things he did to Christians was unspeakable in there. And one of the things that he also did was execute Peter, and he executed Paul as well as part of this persecution. And in fact, If you look at the last letters that Paul and Peter both wrote, which would be 2 Timothy for Paul, 2 Peter for Peter, both Peter and Paul were aware that their deaths were coming. They knew this. And so neither of them says when they're talking about their coming death that this is going to be really scary and I don't know if I'm saved or maybe I ought to be worried about this or any of this other type of stuff. They're concerned about what happens to the church after they're gone. Paul's writing to Timothy so that Timothy knows how to conduct himself as a preacher of the gospel after Paul's gone. Peter's writing to these Christians in the north coast of Turkey so that they will know, and other Christians will know, this is what you need to do after I'm gone. So this is more legacy in that regard than it is, them worrying about this thing. But both of them were executed around 66 to 67 AD. The style of the way they were executed was different. Since Paul was a Roman citizen, he was beheaded rather than being crucified or subjected to a more public form of execution. I mean, one of the things they were doing with Christians, and when Nero was persecuting them, he was tying them to crosses and pouring oil over them and burning them alive. They were also being fed to the lions in the various arenas and things like that. And since Paul was a Roman citizen, you couldn't do that to him. And the way you executed a Roman citizen was by beheading, because that was the fastest, quickest, most painless way possible to kill a Roman citizen. Peter was not a Roman citizen, so he was crucified. Crucifixion was the form of execution that the Romans used when they wanted to make a very special point, and that special point is you don't want to mess with Rome, because this is what we will do to you. And according to early Christian writers, Peter chose to be crucified upside down because he did not believe he was worthy to die in the same way that Christ was executed, right side up. It may have had the side benefit of ending his life a little earlier, hanging upside down like that and having all the blood pool in his head or something like that. But he was crucified. In both cases, Christians carried them away and buried them, and I think that the remains of one or both of them are allegedly in the Vatican in Rome. I don't know, I've never seen it. Didn't really pay much attention to it. So they did die, in this persecution. All right. Is there any questions or comments before we want to get into the text this evening? All right. We won't get too far into this thing, but I'll get us at least a little bit started here. All right, I'm there. Who wants to read this passage for us? Candy? All right. This is going to be a little bit wordier in the study than what I would prefer to do, but there's some things that we really need to understand. So the first word that's of significance to us is in verse 1, which the New American Standard translates by the words "of the same kind." It's a single Greek word, but they're giving us a kind of a definition of it. So that's going to be our first one term. What it means when grace and peace are multiplied to you. Knowledge is a special word in 2 Peter, and we'll look at what that is. And then again, true knowledge. It's the same word as in the previous verse in verse 2, but this is again kind of a clarifying definition of it. What's a partaker? And then what does it mean to have escaped? What is corruption? And what is lust? We've seen some of these words before, but some of them we haven't. So the important words in verse 1, this idea of the same kind, it means of equal value, held in equal honor. So I think the King James translated this like precious faith. Basically means your faith is precious, my faith is precious, and they're alike, they're equal. Peter is writing this to them and making this point with them. He doesn't have an advantage over them. They all have the same faith. Multiplied means to cause, to increase, or to multiply. How many of you have an investment account or a savings account or something like that? Something that compounds interest. Yeah, most of us do have that. I think saving accounts for the last like 10, 20 years have been kind of useless and things like that. But if you have money in some place where it's earning interest, what happens is they go through the period, say it's daily or weekly or whatever it is, they go through the period and they calculate what your interest was for that particular period, and they add it to the amount that you have. And then when you do it the next day, they calculate it again, only this time you still have that little sliver you got yesterday, and so you get a little bit more out of it. So it continues to grow. And one of the things that it does, if you leave it in there long enough, is it grows exponentially. When the Dutch bought the Manhattan Island off of the Native Americans when they first landed in, what's now New York, they gave them a bunch of beads and trinkets and stuff like that that amounted to about $24 in value. If the Native Americans had taken those beads, cashed them in, and put that money in a bank at just even an average interest rate, that money would be worth over $24 billion in today's money. Why? Because it multiplied over time. Got your hand up? Okay. So that's kind of what he's wanting. You're accruing interest here, spiritual interest, if you will, and it's growing over time. The word knowledge in verses 2 and 3 is a different Greek word than the one that we normally encounter, gnosis. This Greek word is epignosis. It's an exact or a full knowledge. It's discernment. It's recognition. Epi usually means in addition to. So this is knowledge in addition to knowledge. Now, why is this important? Why is Peter using this word? Because the Gnostics are emphasizing gnosis. So Peter's saying, no, that you don't have a full knowledge, you don't have a full understanding to it. We use the word epi in kind of a unique way. Everybody in here is clothed with skin, a dermal layer. But on the outside of your skin, you have this outer layer, it's called an epidermis. This is the thing that protects your body. You take this off and you're in a world hurt. I mean, literally, you're going to be in pain that you can't even describe. But that's the function that this thing serves. It's this additional layer in addition to what we have already. Partakers comes from the Greek word koinonos, which means to have in common. This is the big word that describes Christian unity, describes fellowship, describes how we ought to relate to one another. What do we have in common? Now, in our nation, in our world, and in our culture at this time, nobody wants to know what we have in common. Everybody wants to talk about what makes us different. So, if you're not in my political party, then that makes you different. And that's a reason to keep eyes on you and treat you suspiciously or what have you. If you don't like my foods, maybe, or something like that, or don't like the sports I like or something like that, that's a reason to treat you different. Now, if you're a Steelers fan and you're living in Central Ohio, what is wrong with you? Well, look at Cincinnati and look at Cleveland and tell me what's wrong with you, you know. But that's what we emphasize now in our society. And it doesn't bring us anything good because we're not looking at what we have in common. We still have more in common with our fellow countrymen than we don't have in common with them, but it's the things that we don't have that causes the fighting. Having escaped is a Greek word that means to flee away from. So when he talks about having escaped, what he's saying is he's describing this as, you remember that roaring lion that he talked about in the first verse and how we were, you know, he was going around seeking whom he may devour? If you were out in his world, if you were out in his, what happened here? If you're out in that lion's world, you would want to flee from his, from his grip. So you escape. It's an active thing. You're actually doing this yourself. You're trying to escape from it, and so God is helping us do this. Corruption describes a condition of being brought into an inferior or worse condition. Did you ever do something that you thought was going to do something good for you and had it do the total opposite? Most of us have done something like that as kids. I can remember as a child that my brother and I decided, the mummy movies were popular in the theaters and things like that. My brother and I decided that we were going to be mummies, and the way we did this is we went out behind the house and we turned the water faucet on and made a big old pile of mud in there, and then we put this mud all over our skins there. And so then we were staggering around being mummies and stuff like that until the mud started to dry. So that wasn't fun anymore. Why? Because all the hairs and stuff like that were getting pulled out of our arms and legs, and well, we didn't have any on our legs at that time, but our hair was being pulled out in various places, the head and all of this kind of stuff like that. Not a fun time. And so when we went over and turned the faucet on, started trying to rinse ourselves off out, our mother came out and she saw us in this condition, and so we got paddled and put in the bathtub and couldn't go out of the house the rest of the day. So that's a situation where we had been brought to an inferior or worse condition. You know, sounded like a good idea at the time, but it turned out to be anything but. Lust, the Greek word epithumia, and it means a strong desire of any kind. This word is not always used in the Bible to describe what we would call lust or negative, strong emotion or something like that, but most of the time it is. Any strong desire, though, could be covered by this word. Okay, bell's about to ring. I think that's all right. Yeah, we'll stop there for today, and then we'll pick it up next week and move on into the rest of the chapter. So at this particular point, we can conclude nothing. So.